We're going to begin creating a business or marketing plan for the You Got It training company. To do so, we need to start a brand new Word document. Now, there are basically three ways that we can start new documents. One would be to actually open up an existing file and kind of take out the stuff we don't want and then add in new stuff that we do or update the data that's there. Another is to use a template, either from Microsoft, a third party, or even one that we've created. We'll create our own later on in this series. The most common is probably to start from scratch using a blank document. When we open Word, a blank document is presented for us. What I have in front of me is the Word interface, but with no documents open. What I want to do is go ahead and create a file, but I want to show you how to do that other than just opening up Word and having the blank document appear. We do that, of course, by clicking on the File tab, which brings up our Backstage view. We can see that since nothing is open, everything is pretty much grayed out, but we can click on the New option. From here, we can see all of those things that I was just talking about. For example, on the right-hand side, we can create a new file from an existing file. And this is kind of cool because it opens up a copy of that original file. That means you don't accidentally save over the old file and it's going to be protected. You can use your own templates, you can use sample templates, or even recent templates. You can even work with blog posts, which we'll do in the very last chapter of this series. We, however, are interested in a blank document, so we're going to go ahead and double-click on this one. Double-clicking opens up whatever we've selected, in this case, a blank page. Basically, there's three ways to get here. We can open Word, which is going to open up with a blank document. We can do what we just did by going to the Backstage and double-clicking blank document, or we also can use the keyboard shortcut Control-N, N being for new. What I want to make sure everybody understands, though, is that all documents in Word are based on a template. So even though it seems like we didn't choose a template, we did. This looks like a blank page, but it is a template as well. It's called the normal template, and it's the one that comes with Word. Unless it's changed, it's usually letter-sized page in the portrait or tall orientation with about 1-inch margins all around. No, you don't have to remember all of that. Just know that this is a blank page, but it really is a template, the normal template. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change settings before we start putting type onto the page. We're going to do all of this from the Page Layout tab. Page Layout actually kind of replaces the old File Page Setup options that you're probably used to seeing if you've used prior versions of Word. For now, we're going to focus right on this Page Setup group. We can see options for margin, orientation, and size. We're not going to worry too much about these other options quite yet. Personally, I like to start off by determining the page size. If you're working in the United States, you're probably going to be choosing between letter or legal, and both of these are listed. We also have the standards for the European style sizes, and there may be even some custom ones that you select as well. I do want to go all the way to the bottom where I can show you more paper sizes just to show you what options are available. For example, if you were using a special stationery or some odd size paper, you don't have to try to make do and kind of trick Word into doing what you want. Instead, you can come in, and if you choose something from the drop-down, that's fine, but you also can choose to do custom. Then you simply put in the width and height that you want, and you also can choose your paper source. So, for example, if you're going to have your stationery in a special tray, you can say that that should come from the first tray. Notice it does talk about the first printed page as well as other pages. So in a business environment, the first tray may be the tray that has your business letterhead, and the other pages may come from what we call second sheets or blank pages. Hopefully you'll know which one of these to select based on your environment, or hopefully you can ask somebody else who can help you with that. We'll go ahead and just click Cancel for now. And from our drop-down for size, we're just going to stick with a plain old letter size page. When it comes to orientation, there are only two options, portrait and landscape. Portrait is tall, landscape is wide. We're going to leave ours in the portrait orientation. Now we get to the setting of these three that really is the most intriguing and can actually have the most options. They are the margins. Margins are basically the white space on the top, bottom, left, and right of the page. You typically don't want things to run all the way to the edge. They just don't look good, and it makes it very difficult to read. Other things that may determine your margins include your printer. For example, inkjet printers often need more space at the bottom of the page than a laser printer. So an inkjet printer might require 3/4 of an inch, whereas a laser printer can get all the way down to maybe only 1/4 inch. So you want to take into consideration both the physical capabilities of your printers, if you'll be printing the document, as well as what visually looks nice on the page. You'll also see that, as is Microsoft's trend, it's going to give you some of the more common settings. For example, 1 inch all around or a 1/2 inch all around. We actually are going to do something special with this particular marketing plan, so we're going to come down and choose Custom Margins. This may look familiar from old versions. This is the old File Page Setup dialog box. This time, though, we're on the Margins tab. We want to have what appears to be a 1/2 inch margin. However, we have some considerations. Now, those considerations don't come into play on the top, so we're just going to use the little scroll button here, come down to 0.5. We also are going to do this for the right-hand side. We need to have special consideration and measurements, though, for the bottom and the left, and here's why. We know that the bottom of our document will ultimately have a footer. If we set the bottom to 0.5, it's going to sit right on top of the footer. They will print over each other, and that's not good. So we're going to go ahead and bump that up to a full inch. That way the footer will sit at 1/2 inch, and the actual bottom of the page for the document text will be at 1 inch, with everything nice and evenly spaced. Now we get to the interesting one. We need to have a left margin, but actually it's not only a left margin. We're going to bind our marketing plan. That means we're going to actually punch holes in it and put a binding on it. So there has to be some extra space. The first thing we need to do, though, is we actually need to tell Word that this is going to be a bound document. We do that by moving down to the Pages group where it says Multiple Pages. And instead of Normal, we're going to say that we want to mirror the margins. Now we'll talk about what this means in just a second, but I did also want to tell you that you have something called a book fold. So if you were printing on letter-sized pieces of paper, but you were planning on folding them in half, for example, for a school program or something like that, that's when book fold comes into play. Because if you print them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe through page 10, and then fold them in half, they're going to be out of order. The book fold takes into account how those will actually be folded together, and so you don't have to do anything special, but it will actually print them in the correct order. Now let's get back to mirror margins. I want you to watch the left and right settings for margins when this is selected. They change from inside to outside. You'll also notice that our preview changes because we need extra space on the inside of the document, not necessarily the left edges. When you're binding something, you need to make sure that this is set correctly so that it's not talking about the left or right, but instead the inside versus the outside. Now we can say that for our inside we do need 1 inch. We need that little bit of extra space in order to punch the holes and put in the spiral binding. And we can say that our outside should still be 0.5. So even though it looks like these are a little bit odd, we can actually take care of all of them and they'll look more natural once we get everything put together the way it ultimately will be. The last setting we need to take a look at is the gutter. If you had a really thick book, let's say 200 pages, the gutter adds extra space that will be taken up in the binding. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this a really big number so that you can see what it does in our preview. See how it's adding the extra space? It says if you have a huge stack of papers, that's all going to kind of get sucked up in the binding. And so you need the gutter space as well as the margin space. We're not going to do that. Our document is not that large, and we're going to use a spiral binding, so the gutter is not necessary. But now you know what it's for. With those things set, we can say OK, and now each of our pages, instead of being exactly the same, is going to alternate the margins from one side to the other based on whether it is an even or an odd page. Most of the time you'll be using your margin settings from the actual option in the ribbon. However, I did want to show you that it is possible to work with margins right from the ruler. I'm going to go ahead and drag this little indicator out of the way for a second and show you that our ruler kind of goes from gray to the white ruler, and then if we could see the other side, let me go ahead and zoom out a little bit here. We can see the same thing on the right. The white part is the workable portion of our page, and the gray is the margin. So if we wanted to make the margin on the left a little bit larger, we could move to the ruler right on the gray, get the double-headed arrow, and we could simply drag. Now we have a larger left margin. Likewise, we can drag it back out. The problem with this method, of course, is it's not very specific. In other words, I don't know what I just dragged it to. Therefore, I prefer doing the other thing instead. What we can do to make sure we get this back where we want is we can go back and choose to undo the last 2 things that we did, maybe even the last 3. That's going to put our markers back where they were as well, and now everything is back the way that we expected it to be. but you do know that you have a quick and easy way to minimize or maximize your margins without having to actually open up the dialog. I know that a lot of times we don't think too much about these kinds of things, page size, orientation, and margins. But for some projects, they become more important, like printing double-sided and binding a formal proposal, or ensuring that a note be printed on stationery that fits the paper correctly. They're also important for some professions, like legal, where the paper size is critical and different than the typical 8.5 by 11. Or maybe you're working in Europe for a few weeks and they have different size paper as well. Since we know we can set them and even save them as our defaults, we may not need to use them often. But when we do, it's good to know that they're readily available from the ribbon so we can properly set the physical foundation of our document.